question. Mr. President, I'd like to talk about marketplace fairness, which ought to be an all-American subject here in the Senate, and it's turned out to be one that attracts strong bipartisan support. In November, Senator Enzi of Wyoming, the Democratic whip, Senator Durbin, and I introduced, along with 7 other senators, an equal number from both sides of the aisle, what we call the Marketplace Fairness Act, to close a 20-year loophole in the American marketplace by picking winners and losers, by subsidizing some businesses at the expense of other businesses, and subsidizing some taxpayers at the expense of other taxpayers. My colleagues and I keep talking about it because we strongly believe, as do many people across this country, that now is the time for Congress to act. Many Americans don't realize that when they buy something online, which we increasingly do today, or order something through a catalog, which we've done for a long time, from a business outside of our own state, in the case of the catalog, that we still owe the state sales tax. So what we're talking about doesn't even rise to the dignity of a loophole. What we're talking about is a law that says you owe the state sales tax even if you buy it online and even if you buy it from a catalog from out of state. The law says today already, if you buy it, you owe it. This is not a problem only for big retailers like Amazon and Walmart. It's a problem that's killing small businesses in Tennessee and across our country. Last month, Governor Bill Haslam of Tennessee and I spoke with small business owners from Knoxville and Oak Ridge, Chattanooga, Johnson City, Nashville, and Memphis about this problem. Every single one of those business owners shared personal stories about how this loophole has hurt their business. Basically, this is what they say happens. I remember the story of the Nashville Boot Company. I talked with the owner there. A customer comes into the store, tries on a boot, gets advice from employees about the boot, and then goes home to buy the product online in order to avoid paying the state sales tax, which the customer owes. The state law says you owe the tax. The problem is when you buy something at the Nashville Boot Company or any other local store, the Nashville Boot Company collects the tax from you, adds it to your bill, and then sends the money to the state. That's how it's always worked. But if you buy the same boot or the same other article online or through a catalog, that business doesn't collect the state sales tax, even though you owe it. So the result is that similar businesses selling the same thing are being treated entirely differently. That isn't right, and it isn't fair, and most Americans who have looked at the issue agree with that. So how did this happen? Well, in 1992, when most of us couldn't possibly have imagined how the internet would have changed the way we shop for things, the Supreme Court said states couldn't require out-of-state catalogs or online sellers to do the same thing states require of stores up and down Main Street. What was the reason? Because it was too complicated for an online seller like Amazon or a catalog seller to figure out what could the sales tax be in Tennessee, and then how much do you have to add on in Maryville, which is a town I live in. Well, 20 years ago, I might have agreed with that. But today, technology has made it easy for catalog sellers or online sellers to do the same thing Main Street sellers are required to do. Let me give you an example. This morning, I wanted to know what the weather was in my hometown of Maryville, Tennessee. So I opened my computer up, I went to Google, I typed in my zip code, I typed in weather, and it told me the weather. The software now exists to provide to catalog sellers or online sellers the same sort of easy way to find out what the sales tax is. If I were to buy a TV set in Maryville, Tennessee, they could just type in that city, the price, my name, and it would tell them tax. They could even send the tax on to the state. In fact, it's about as easy with this software that's under our law going to have to be provided to anybody from out of state. It's about as easy for them to find out what the tax is as it would be for the National Boot Company when somebody walks in and tries on the boots in Nashville. Some people have asked, well, why should Congress get involved in this? Because nothing is preventing states from going ahead and collecting those taxes. That's true. If I were to buy my boots in Nashville and online and not pay the sales tax, the governor could come knocking on my door and add on the 9 cents or whatever it is, 9%, onto the purchase price of the boots. But that's not going to happen in a practical world. I mean, the state can't do that for millions of purchases that are made every year online, and no one wants the governor and his agents knocking on our doors about that. So there's a simpler way to do it. And Congress should make it easy for states to be able to do that, because we should recognize the loophole is unfair, that it's anti-competitive, and it's distorting the marketplace. As a Republican senator, I believe our party should oppose government policies that prefer some businesses over other businesses and some taxpayers over other taxpayers. And I believe in states' rights. Our bill gives states the right to make decisions for themselves. If Illinois or Tennessee or California wants to prefer some businesses over others, wants to prefer some taxpayers over others, they can do that. That's their state's right. But we ought to make it possible for them not to do that. A number of conservatives have been outspoken supporters for our legislation. At times, conservatives were reluctant to support it over the years because it was complicated and because it, quote, sounded like a, quote, tax. Well, it's about a tax, but it's a tax that's already owed. Here's what Al Cardenas, the head of the chairman of the American Conservative Union, says. He supports our legislation, and he says, quote, there's no more glaring example of misguided government power than when taxes or regulations affect two similar businesses completely differently, unquote. Governor Haley Barbour also supports our bill. He said, there's simply no longer a compelling reason for government to continue giving online retailers special treatment over small businesses. Governor Mitch Daniels of Indiana said a similar thing. Congressman Mike Pence of Indiana, a well-known conservative congressman, said, quote, I don't think Congress should be in the business of picking winners and losers. Inaction by Congress today results in a system that does pick winners and losers. That's what Mike Pence had to say. At CPAC this past weekend, a gathering of conservative activists, there was a panel of leaders and industry experts about this legislation. And the general agreement was that Congress should act to solve the problem. The solution, the panelists said, should be fair, some people can understand, and meet the needs of states, consumers, and retailers. I believe our legislation accomplishes all these goals. In the first place, it's a rarity in federal legislation. It is only 10 pages long. You can actually read it in a few minutes. It's fair because it gives states the right to decide for themselves how to enforce the state's own laws. It affects businesses and consumers by requiring states to adopt simple, basic simplifications. I'm talking about the software that you could give to Amazon so it could figure out in an instant what the tax on my TV set is if I buy a TV set online from Amazon. And it exempts small businesses that sell for less than $500,000 a year in remote sales each year. That's very important. I use the example of the Nashville Boot Company. He sells online and he sells out the front door. He said never in his history has he sold more than $400,000 worth of revenue from his boot sales online. And when he began, he at least was one of the larger sellers of boots online. So the $500,000 exemption for small businesses from this legislation should go a long way to meet the concerns of those senators on both sides who want to make sure we don't impose some sort of new rule on very small entrepreneurs. Another reason Congress should act now is that states and local governments will lose an estimated $23 billion in collected sales tax revenue in 2012 just because of this loophole. Here's what former Governor Jeb Bush had